Hi, my name is Ken Lastenson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription website. I have had to deal with chronic fatigue syndrome several times in my life, recovered from it, first more by happenstance, later by actual design and understanding the causality and the mechanism of it and addressing them. The result of that experience was creating a site called Microbiome Prescription, which basically addresses the root catalyst or ongoing method by which chronic fatigue syndrome keeps going and going and going. Not the cause necessarily, but the mechanism by which it perpetuates. Now, I just got an email from a person who has chronic fatigue syndrome, his very first microbiome sample. So he asked some questions and provided a sample. The thing is, this is what I would call a very clean-cut demonstration of how the microbiome prescription website can actually be helpful for constructively addressing the condition. So let's take a quick look at his email. First of all, he's a fan of my main site, CFS Remission. And he just got a research back. He had one bacteria which was sky high, has some hesitancy about herbals, and part of that has been his experience. He was tested possible for SIBO, and personally SIBO I find is a problematic diagnosis. It is a little bit too vague, especially on how it's being tested. There are too many bacteria that produces the gases they are testing for, and if you happen to get lucky and they assume it's a bacteria which they're going to treat for, fine. If it's not going to have effect, and that's what's happened with him. Basically, he had multiple rounds of antibiotic. He also went over antimicrobial, so he went the usual route with people for SIBO, but didn't really do anything. And also regularly eats yogurt, and he then goes and gives a symptom. Brain fog is one of the things. The fact that he's eating yogurt and brain fog means we have a disconnect. Again, people with chronic fatigue tend to have brain fog, which means they don't necessarily keep all the information in mind, which means they often will do dumb things because they can't remember what the right thing is. Okay, so most of the symptoms are basically classic CFS ME symptoms, and basically went in, and his first question was, look, I have just bacteria which I'm high in, but what I see is that it's low in. Well, I stopped for a moment and did a couple of things. First of all, I checked the sibling, which is long COVID, and we find that 4 studies reported the levels being low, and 3 of these were also high, and also high and low. So in other words, you will, depending on the luck of the draw of who's being studied, either get an average being higher than normal or average that's getting lower than normal. In other words, the only thing you can conclude is that people with chronic fatigue syndrome and with long COVID have a atypical amount. You don't know if it's going to be high or low. There's other factors that come into play here. So it's not a very simple, straightforward, you could high or low, you can go either direction. So let's go over and take a look at his sample. I went over and looked at his sample. The first thing I tend to do, especially if chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID is suspect, is take a look at the pattern. And the pattern which I usually see is we see in our percentile breakdown. In an ideal healthy microbiome, the numbers for each one of these 10 percentile ranges should all be about the same number. If they are not, something is going on, something atypical. And the main thing is with chronic fatigue syndrome, what we have is we have overrepresentation of the low percentile and underrepresentation of the high percentile, which generally is a very rough indicator, but it's probably is related to those conditions. Doesn't have to be those conditions, but connected with it, and that gives us some information. What he identified as being is concerned is also identified here, as well as two other bacteria, which are excessive in growth. And so we could actually go over to one of these, and we have there, and we see we have interaction with other bacteria, and we can see if we have 6 bacteria to interact with. None of them were the other ones, but it was just something to check. Sometimes when you have other things sitting there, like here, you find that the items are related, so growth of one causes the growth of the other, and the only way to do it is to actually check out to see if you can. So far what we see is, okay, he has chronic fatigue thing. The interesting thing was he has had COVID, and he also has COVID vaccine. COVID vaccine will likely cause some alteration to look like COVID. Why? Very simple. The vaccine basically gives you a mild case, so your body responds to it and builds up the immunity. How it responds also changes the microbiome. Hence, the microbiome after a COVID vaccination will shift a little bit towards the COVID and then hopefully come back. That happens for all vaccines. They will cause a shift. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but the reality is, yes, vaccine may cause secondary GI issues. Overall, the risk is less taking it than not taking it. Let's go over to health analysis. Health analysis, we see a couple of things. Acne is one of the things that which he mentioned, and he happens to come up. Other things are there. Generally, unless you are really up high, I usually tend to regard even the IgA here is high, but it only occurs in 0.01% of the people. So yeah, he's a good distance away from it. It just these are sense of things that could be going on, not predictive, just sense. Then we get down and we indicate the things that are problematic, none of which are particularly surprising, just one we already know about. Everything else is basically done things which has problems, but most of the time his percentage isn't that particularly bad. Just one there is there, so that may be a factor coming in. Going on to look at the patient Harlech's recommendation, we see he's at the 56th percentile. In one sense, he's about as healthy as half the people, or if you prefer the other way of looking at it, he's about as sick as half the people who have uploaded the samples, which means since probably most people who upload the samples have health issues, it indicates he probably has health issues, which is what we already know. Okay, so that gives you a bit of the quick background. Let's go over to hey, let's do it a fast way. Chronic fatigue syndrome, problems with mental complexities, etc. So we just hit the red button. And then we'll take a few seconds while it proceeds to calculate out everything. And then we have our cookbook suggestions, which are things which are sort of picked from the standard list of items, some high, some low. But what I'm going to do here, you can work from that list if that's as much as you can easily handle cognitively, is I'll go over the technical details, which is basically all the details from the fact that we run 4 different models on how to select bacteria and get the suggestions from them. And we now have the suggestions. Number one suggestion is chemotherapy. That is usually a little bit of a hard sell to most MDs. And then we have other things. We have salt, we have omega-3 fatty acids, which is a good indicator. We have rhubarb, etc. And what I usually do is I look at this number and roughly take a look at the highest number and divide it by half. So anything which is over 180, I'm going to pay attention to. Anything below 180 down to 0, I start to ignore. Anything which is a negative, like stevia, soy, quercetin with resveratrol, xylene, their resistant starch, are usually things which I aggressively try to take off my consumption list, if at all practical. So I, in the example, went through and basically did a few things. One of the things I did was I looked at antibiotics, and he indicated he had taken one which had no particular effect. And actually, let's see. There we go. There's the name. So I just could have typed the name of the antibiotic he took here, and we see it is a negative. Guess what? What does a negative mean? It means that it's something to be avoided. In other words, the antibiotic he was prescribed could well have continued making the situation worse. Another thing which he indicated, which is he was treated with some herbals for it. And let's just go and take hop back and look at it. And we go down here, and I looked up here a source for what herbs are usually used for SIBO, and of the 5 that I normally use, 3 of them are likely to keep this bacteria going in the wrong direction. 2 are likely to do it. So I went through and picked the best of the choices left of things he should try, which happens to include the 2 positive there and a bunch of other. Now, another thing he issues or whatever he raised was aspect of fiber, and I'm going to go and type in fiber, and we see a high fiber diet is a definite to avoid, and a low fiber diet is something to be done. He indicated that fiber he has problems with them. Guess what? The system predicted the identical same thing. So it's sort of nice because it would and identify the item there. My general impression is that we want to keep at 180 and above, and so that's fine there. Grape fiber is a positive, but it's below the 180, which means I would usually not pay much attention to it. So let's go and see anything go. Okay, another thing which was probiotics, which is sitting there, and one of the things which he mentioned is brain fog. And brain fog, I give a link to some studies showing where brain fog is associated with D-lactic acid. D-lactic acid is produced by many lactobacillus probiotics, but not produced by bifidobacterium probiotics. So the result was I suggested the bifidobacterium ones here just to be absolutely safe. And that's over 180. The other ones are a bit below it, but in terms of probiotics, yes. In terms of taking regular yogurt, if you can find a yogurt with absolutely no lactobacillus, go for it. If you cannot find one with absolutely 0 lactobacillus, you may want to give up yogurt. Or check the Facebook group where somebody has developed a formula for having a bifidobacterium-based yogurt, and go that route. But basically, you are not wanting to do there. So let's sort of go through everything out. The thing which I mentioned, okay, let me just bring that up on screen. Okay. Okay. One of the thing is I looked at a list of probiotic antibiotics, and well, since he's already getting some antibiotics from his physician, I wanted to drop some suggestions for some other ones to try. And there were two, one which are high on his positive list, one which I have a link to 2017 post showing the effect of it, and then I have another one for the second one where it's interesting and which comes back to why I go the microbiome prescription route. Here we have a case where it was studied, 58% improved. That means 42% did not get better. In fact, some probably got worse. Which is what I have kept seeing time and time again in studies when you dig down into the detail of the study. Is not everybody, even though the study report, yes, just helps people in a study group, keyword on average. When you take a look at the actual numbers, you'll find that it helps some and hurts others. Studies recently dealing with a variety of therapies for cancer has shown that the existing microbiome determines whether or not the therapy will work or not work, and for chronic fatigue syndrome, the same. Whether or not this antibiotic works depends on your microbiome. And how does it work? Generally, it works by altering the microbiome. So if it doesn't alter the microbiome in the right way, it's unlikely to work. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to do a with insurance approach. First, find the suggestions, take a look at the suggestions, check the literature to see if the substance has been studied. If it has been studied and has in general had a positive result on a significant number of people in the study, then we'll go for it. Because the microbiome indicates you will benefit from the substance, and the substance is also found to work for chronic fatigue syndrome, then you have insurance. Chances are very good that it will actually help. Alternatively, just saying, oh, this study says it helps chronic fatigue syndrome, and you try it, you are basically probably flipping a coin whether or not it helps or even hurts more, because whether or not it helps or hurts depends on your microbiome, and it may just be the wrong one. That's why I prefer combining the two. Your microbiome has to say it's good for you, and clinical studies has to say it helps for your condition. If both of those are happening, then you are probably at very low risk of it not working, or at least very, very low risk of it hurting you. So then another one was there, two things, and again gave the link, things which are high on the list of recommendation, which are also validated by clinical studies to help chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's what I always try doing. Chronic fatigue syndrome, I happen to know the literature very well, having been dealing with it for 25 years or so. And so the result is when you get suggestions, I check the literature. If there's agreement, then you know when to go forward. The taxophorine here, which is suggested, is interesting because the post I did actually dealt with its impact on histamine, and he was indicating he was a histamine issue. What we have here is we have the suggestions coming out from the microbiome prescription side being in agreement with the literature for things for chronic fatigue syndrome. But it doesn't say all the things. It says just a subset of items are what you want to be doing, which is the wisest way of doing it. Your odds of being successful are much better than just trying the things found to be successful from studies. You want to have a two solid strikes at two solid swings of improving yourself, and you need both of those to do it. So don't do random trials. Oh, just help me. You try it and it makes you worse, etc. What you want to do is restrict yourself to things which are predicted based on your microbiome to help you and do those things. So that is basically it. The study is going to be up shortly. And it's just trying to keep to the things that will help you and which are validated by the literature, and avoiding any things that are likely to hurt you as much as is practical. Okay, that's it.